The General Hospital teaser video for the week of August 11th to 15th suggests that Jason Morgan will meet with Dr. Britt Westbourne, while Jocelyn Jack's attempts to play hero after Vaughn is attacked in their Five Poppies resort room. The weekly teaser has been out, and it appears that viewers can expect another 5 days of explosive drama on the ABC soap. The GH promotional video begins with Jason at a parking garage, with a chauffeur opening the car door for him. He firmly glances out the window, his voice stating, "I have to make sure Britt's okay." As the scenes change in the trailer, Vaughn is on the voiceover asking, "Who is she?" Jocelyn responded, "You mean who was she? She's supposed to be dead." A tape is then shown of Joss sneaking a peek in some flower bushes at the resort while Vaughn applies suntan lotion to Britt. The two are catching some rays, sitting in lounge chairs close to each other. Britt's history and present will undoubtedly intersect, as Jocelyn notices the presumed dead doctor and realizes she is still alive. But will Britt discover that Jocelyn is present? That being said, Jocelyn is not the only one who meets Britt during the week of August 11th, but we'll get to that in a bit. As the film progresses, it shows an explosive moment in which Jocelyn unexpectedly walks in on Vaughn being strangled with a wire and garroted by an unknown man in their resort suite. The following clip shows Joss leveling a gun at Vaughn and the attacker, and a shot is fired. Here's hoping the new WSB agent's gun shooting abilities are up to par, that Joss doesn't shoot her teammate instead of the bad guy. Finally, Britt fans get the reunion they've been longing for. Jason arrives at the Five Poppies resort and is speaking with Pascal when something catches his eye. As the figure goes across the room, Jason's eyes follow, only to reveal that it is Britt. He notices her, and her gaze locks on him just as the commercial video ends. According to General Hospital teasers, Jason will finally know for certain that Britt is alive, but he will also understand why she faked her death and has stayed away from loved ones for so long. General Hospital spoilers are out for the week of August 11th, 2025. Fans should anticipate Britt Westbourne to face punishment. Drew Kane manipulates Michael Corinthos. Stella Henry also begs Kai Taylor to fight for Trina Robinson. Continue reading and let's discuss what's coming up on the ABC soap drama. Britt Westbourne punished. Let's begin with Britt, who is obstinate while being treated like a spoiled prisoner at the Five Poppies resort in Croatia. The brunette is working on something secret, but it's unclear what. Jack Brennan shifted the investigation's focus from Professor Henry Hank Dalton to the Five Poppies resort. Britt refuses to work until she has what she wants. However, Pascal issues a threat. By midweek, Britt is punished. Vaughn and Jocelyn Jax arrived at the resort. Jocelyn couldn't identify Britt from behind because of her large hat. However, Joss and Britt are likely to face each other shortly. By Friday, Jason Morgan is a man on a mission, leaving Joss frustrated. Drew Kane's manipulation. Drew has made a phone call regarding a medical insurance fraud probe. Stella is not doing herself or the hospital any favors by assisting Martin Gray with an insurance issue. Drew will also have an interaction with Willow Tate. While she wants nothing to do with him, he is likely to make a pledge. The congressman presumably promises he'll get Willow custody of her children back. By the conclusion of the week, Drew has manipulated Michael. Alexis Davis's legal solution. General Hospital spoilers for the week of August 11th show that Alexis Davis is considering a legal action. Could she seek custody of Scout Kane? Maybe, but Molly Lansing Davis disagrees with whatever her strategy is. Later in the week, Molly attempts to reason with Drew. However, the congressman is likely to do what he wants anyhow. Could his reaction to her plea sway Molly's opinion on Alexis' legal strategy? Molly hasn't spent as much time with Drew as others have, so she may be unaware of how awful he has gotten. Fans will also see Carly Spencer confront Marco Rios during the week of August 11th, 2025. Harrison Chase feels compelled to make an arrest. Later, he pays Willow another visit. Rocco Falconeri attempts to soothe Gio Palmieri. Dante Falconeri consults with Brooke Lynn Quartermain. Britt couldn't believe what her eyes told her. For a moment, she wondered if she was hallucinating, whether the stress and weariness had finally pushed her into a vivid dream from which she couldn't wake up. But there he was, standing just a few steps away, his posture exactly as she remembered it, solid, steadfast, and exuding a serenity that had both bothered her and reassured her. Jason. He was not supposed to be here. He was not meant to be anywhere near Port Charles. She'd heard the rumors, of course, whispers in the hospital halls, passing references in police chatter, but she'd disregarded them. She had convinced herself that people liked to speak and dream the impossible, and that seeing him again was something she'd never have to deal with. And yet, here he was, and the look on his face told her that whatever had brought him back was not good. She took a tentative step toward him, her heart pounding in her chest, torn between 1,000 silent inquiries and the want to say nothing at all. Jason's eyes flickered with something she couldn't place. Guilt, relief, perhaps even regret. But before she could say anything, a harsh, strangled groan from behind her shattered the fragile silence between them. She turned around to see Vaughn, the nightclub owner, battling with a figure whose face was partially concealed by darkness. She thought it was just a fight at first, but then she realized something terrible. A garrote was tightening around his throat, the tiny wire ripping into his skin as his hands clawed madly at it. Britt's breath caught. Everything appeared to move in slow motion. The music from the club continued to beat softly in the background, muffled by the closed doors, but in the alley, the sound seemed almost strange, as if it came from another world. Vaughn's attacker had the advantage, yanking him back against their chest, the garrote digging deeper. Jason was already moving, his hand reflexively reaching for his jacket, but Britt was stuck for a heartbeat, unsure whether she should run, call for aid or intercede. That was all it needed for another voice to emerge from the chaos, sharp, terrified, and full of obstinate purpose. Let him go. It was Jocelyn, and she charged into the scene from the opposite end of the alley, holding her phone in one hand and something metallic in the other. She did not hesitate. Before Jason could get between her and the danger, she swung the thing, which appeared to be a heavy flashlight, right at the attacker's forearm. The impact was strong enough to release the garrote, and Vaughn lurched forward, gasping for air, and fell to his knees. The assailant snarled and turned toward Jocelyn, but Jason had already arrived, jumping into the path like a wall of muscle and determination. His hand rushed out, catching the man's wrist and twisted forcefully till the garrote clattered to the ground. The battle was quick but savage, with Jason forcing the attacker against the brick wall, his voice low and lethal as he demanded a name. But the man did not respond. He simply spat on the ground and ripped free, running into the darkness before Jason could stop him. Britt dropped to Vaughn's side and checked his pulse with unsteady hands. He was breathing, but his voice was raspy when he attempted to speak. "I didn't see his face," he said, looking between Jason and Britt. Britt felt a knot in her stomach as she said, "But he knew me." Whoever dispatched that assailant was not acting at random. This was purposeful and targeted. Jason hunkered beside them, his gaze sweeping the alley, each shadow a possible hiding place for another menace. "We have to get him inside," he replied, his tone leaving no room for disagreement. Now. The three of them managed to get Vaughn up and half-carried him through the club's back entrance. Britt saw astonished expressions and people stopped mid-conversation, but Jason didn't stop until they were in a quieter back room with the door latched. Jocelyn was still breathing hard, and her adrenaline caused her words to come out in bursts. "He was going to kill him. I didn't think, I just acted." Her voice had a quiver that she was clearly attempting to conceal, her chin raised firmly as if daring anybody to judge her. Britt looked into her eyes and saw the truth. Yes, Jocelyn had acted without hesitation, but the shock of what could have happened was now beginning to sink in. Jason's stare softened somewhat. "You did the right thing," he replied, and the simple reassurance helped to calm her. But then his focus returned to Vaughn, and his expression tightened. "Who have you dealt with? This wasn't a random attack." Vaughn gulped hard, his throat crimson from the garrote biting into his skin. "You don't want to get caught up in this, Jason. Trust me." But Jason did not stir or blink, and Vaughn's shoulders dropped after a time. "I've been operating some side projects, nothing major. Just off the books. I believe someone would like to send a message." Jason pressed. "Or a specific person?" Vaughn hesitated, and that was all Jason needed to know. It was someone specific. Britt saw Jason's jaw clench as that old, dangerous calm settled over him like steel. He gave her the same expression she'd seen before, indicating that he'd already resolved to deal with things on his own. Britt's mind kept going back to the first time she saw Jason in the alley, while Vaughn detailed what little he knew, names half-whispered in back rooms, vague warnings that had been ignored until now. She doubted that whatever had led him back to Port Charles had nothing to do with what had just happened. And the fact that Jocelyn had been there, putting herself in risk without hesitation, exacerbated the situation. Jason was already overprotective of those he loved about, and seeing Jocelyn in that way, Britt knew it would pique his interest. When Vaughn was stable enough to be left with a friend who promised to keep an eye on him, Jason urged Britt and Jocelyn to accompany him outside. The air was cooler now with a slight scent of rain, yet the tension had not subsided. "You can't stay here," Jason told Jocelyn, his voice harsh. "If whoever that was comes back, they won't care who's in their way." "I'm not running," Jocelyn replied, crossing her arms. "If I hadn't shown up when I did, Vaughn would be dead." Her tone was defiant, but there was also an undercurrent of fear she couldn't conceal. Jason's eyes softened again, but his voice remained solid. "That is exactly why you need to be cautious. Tonight you got lucky. Next time." He didn't continue the phrase because he didn't need to. Britt watched them, an unpleasant feeling tightening in her chest. This wasn't simply about Vaughn or a failed backroom agreement. There was a wider picture here, one she suspected Jason had seen but wasn't willing to share. That scared her since Jason's silence indicated that things were worse than he was letting on. As they strolled back toward the hospital parking lot, Britt felt herself falling in step with him. "Are you really back?" She spoke quietly. Jason didn't respond immediately away, scanning the street as if he expected trouble around every corner. Finally he replied, "For now." It wasn't much, but it was enough to let her know that whatever had drawn him to Port Charles wasn't going away. When they arrived at her car, Jason came to a halt, his stare fixed on her for an extended period of time. "Stay away from Vaughn for a while," he told him. "If someone's targeting him, I don't want you caught in the crossfire." Britt wanted to disagree, to tell him she wasn't the type of person who needed to be protected, but the memory of that wire tightening around Vaughn's neck was still too fresh. She nodded grudgingly, watching as Jason turned and walked away into the night, Jocelyn trailing him a few strides after, still asking questions he wasn't prepared to answer. Britt sat in her car for a while before starting the engine. She couldn't get Jason in the alley, moving with the same perfect precision he always had, or forget the look in his eyes as he saw the danger closing in on Jocelyn. Whatever storm was developing in Port Charles had already swept them all into its path. Britt understood with an unshakable certainty that this was only the beginning. Even as the city lights rushed past her on the way home, she kept thinking about Vaughn's choked breaths and the glimmer of the garrote in the dim light. She had no idea who the attacker was, but she had a sickening sensation that Jason did, or would very soon. And when he discovered them, the confrontation would not be peaceful or clean. It never was. Britt's boots crunched against the frost-covered ground as she trekked through the snow, her breath forming white clouds that vanished into the frigid air. The woodland was silent except for the occasional snap of a twig underfoot, and the weight of her punishment was heavier than the chill. She'd been sent out here, to the outskirts of the community, to gather firewood alone, a duty designed to teach her humility following her outburst at the council meeting. She'd labeled Elder Torrin a coward for hesitating to fight the intruders encroaching on their area, her voice harsh enough to break through the murmurs of agreement. The council was not pleased with her defiance. They never did. They felt Britt was too young and too brazen, that her 20 years were insufficient to equal their decades of wisdom. So there she was, exiled in the woods for the day, her hands hurting from the cold and her heart filled with resentment. She swung her axe into a fallen log, breaking it with a satisfying crack, but the rage remained. If anything, it grew, spurred by the injustice of the situation. She wasn't wrong. The raiders were becoming more daring, with their tracks appearing closer to the settlement every week. Ignoring them would not cause them to disappear. But the council preferred their fragile peace, and Britt's penalty was their attempt to silence her. Miles away, in the heart of the settlement, Michael sat in the dark light of a lantern, tracing the edges of a map spread out on the table. He was meant to be organizing the next supply run, but his thoughts were wandering, entangled in the words Elder Torrin had spoken to him earlier. "You're our eyes and ears, Michael," the elderly guy remarked, his voice as smooth as river stones. "Keep Britt in check. She's trouble, but you're clever enough to guide her." Michael's gut wrenched at the thought. He didn't want to influence anyone, especially Britt, his childhood friend who had been taking apples from the orchard. But Torrin had a way of making ideas feel like orders, and Michael was aware of the implications. The council oversaw everything, including food rations, labor assignments, and who got to live in the warmer cottages closer to the river. If he didn't play along, he'd lose the small favor he'd gained. He leaned back in his chair, raking a hand through his dark hair, his mind a jumble of allegiance and shame. Britt trusted him. She always has. But Torrin's words clung to him like wet clothes, and Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he was being shaped into something he didn't want to become. Stella and Kai sat cross-legged on the floor of the old library, a deteriorating structure crammed with books that no one else bothered to read. The air smelled of dust and old paper, and a single candle flickered between them, throwing delicate shadows on their faces. Stella's fingers caressed the spine of a constellation book, her voice quiet as she read aloud to Kai, who looked up with wide eyes. They'd been coming here for weeks, ever since Kai admitted to being unable to sleep due to nightmares of the raiders who had kidnapped his parents years earlier. Stella didn't know how to heal that type of anguish, but she knew stories might be a safe haven, a way to escape the harsh realities of life for a while. She'd begun reading to him, first from adventure stories, then from books about stars and mythologies, anything to keep his mind from wandering back into the darkness. Kai, only 16, came in closer, his shoulder brushing against hers as he pointed to an illustration of Orion. "Do you believe the stars are still out there watching us?" he inquired, his voice quiet but intrigued. Stella grinned, her customary guardedness subsiding. "They're always there," she replied, "even when we can't see them." It was a brief moment, but it felt like an anchor, something solid in a world that appeared to be unraveling. Britt's arms hurt as she pulled the load of firewood back to the village, the sled's runners leaving traces in the snow. The sun was setting low, painting the sky in orange and purple, and she hurried her pace, knowing the woods weren't safe at night. Her punishment was supposed to teach her patience, but it had only strengthened her resolve. She had observed the raider tracks again today, this time much closer to the river trail. The council might dismiss her all they wanted, but she was not going to sit back while danger approached. She recalled Michael's attempt to calm her down after the meeting, his voice soothing but stern. "You can't fight everyone, Britt," he'd said, but she dismissed him, too angry to listen. Now she wondered whether he was trying to tell her something else, which she had missed in her rage. She shook her head and pushed the thought aside. Michael was her friend, not one of Torrin's henchmen. He would not betray her. Will he? Back at the settlement, Michael walked the small room, leaving the map on the table. Torrin's words rang louder now, each one weighing on his shoulders. He didn't want to spy on Britt or use her confidence against her. However, the council's favor was more than just comfort. It was also about survival. Last winter, when the rations ran low, Michael witnessed what happened to individuals who fell out of favor. Hunger had a way of weakening even the most resilient souls. He stopped pacing and put his palms on his face, attempting to calm the storm in his mind. Perhaps he can warn Britt without compromising Torrin. Perhaps he could strike a balance between the two, keeping them both happy. But even as he considered it, he knew it was a lie. Loyalty was the settlement's currency, and he was running out of it. Stella closed the book in the library, and the candle had nearly burned out. Kai was quiet, his gaze fixated on the flame, and she knew he was thinking about his parents again. She wanted to say something, anything to entice him back, but words seemed inadequate. Instead, she stretched out and grasped his hand, a little gesture that seemed larger in the silence. Kai stared at her, his expression softening, and for a brief moment, they were just two children in a damaged world, clinging on to each other. "Thanks, Stella," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her throat tightening. She didn't know how to tell him that the peaceful hours at the library were also rescuing her. The colony was a harsh place, full of rules and terror, but with Kai she felt like she could breathe. Britt arrived at the community just as the final light faded, with her sled heaped high with wood. The guards at the gate hardly glanced at her, their expressions flat and indifferent. She didn't care. She had done what they had requested, but she was not going to stoop her head and play nice. She dropped the sled near the storage shed and proceeded toward the center fire, where people gathered to warm their hands and talk news. She recognized Michael in the crowd, his tall form standing out, but something about his posture, tense, almost guarded, made her hesitate. He was speaking with Torin, his head slightly bowed, and Britt's gut twisted. She didn't want to believe he'd turn against her, but uncertainty spread quickly. She clenched her fists, the cold searing into her knuckles as she made a decision. She would confront him not just now but soon. She needed to know where he was standing. Michael felt Britt's gaze on him before seeing her. He excused himself from Torin, ignoring the elder's knowing smile, and moved through the crowd toward her. She appeared weary, her face covered with dirt and her hair knotted in the wind. "Are you okay?" he inquired, keeping his voice light, but her eyes sharpened, scanning his face for something he was unsure he could conceal. "Fine," she replied, her tone harsh. "You?" He nodded, but the air between them felt electrified, as if they were about to face a storm. He wanted to tell her everything, Torin's plan, the pressure, the terrible decision, but the words stayed in his throat. Instead he said, "You need to rest. Long day." Britt's jaw tightened and she walked away, leaving him standing there, his silence heavier than ever. In the library, Kai helped Stella stack the books, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they were both hesitant to leave. The candle had burned out, and the room was now dark, lit only by the weak moonlight that filtered through the shattered windows. "We should come back tomorrow," Kai replied, his tone hopeful. Stella grinned and pulled her coat firmly about her. "Yeah," she replied. "Tomorrow." They stepped outdoors, the cold hitting them like a slap, and walked together to the cottages. Neither spoke, yet the stillness was comforting. A kinship formed through shared stories and peaceful times. Stella saw Kai, his face half hidden in the darkness, and felt a glimmer of optimism. Maybe they couldn't change the world, but they could cling on to this, whatever it was. Britt lay awake that night, staring at the wooden beams in her cabin's ceiling. The settlement was quiet, but her thoughts was racing, repeating the day, the tracks in the snow, Michael's guarded demeanor, Torin's smug countenance. She didn't believe the council or their assurances of protection. And now she was unsure whether she could trust Michael. But she was not going to wait for answers. Tomorrow she'd return to the woods and follow the raiders' footsteps. If the council didn't act, she would. Her punishment had only strengthened her resolve, and she was not afraid of the repercussions. Not yet. Michael sat by his window, the settlement beyond it in darkness. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, not with Torin's words repeating in his thoughts. He thought about Britt, her fiery eyes and unwavering will, and despised himself for what he was doing. He wasn't a traitor quite yet, but he was near. Too close. He needed a plan, a method to keep her safe without losing everything. But the town was a web, and each move he took seemed to entangle him farther. Stella and Kai met again the next day in the library with a new book open between them. The world outside was cold and bleak, but inside they had stories, stars, and each other. It wasn't much, but it was adequate to keep going. That was all they needed right now.